Get out, all of you get out. The crash of shattering glass echoed through the penthouse suite as Zaire Ademi hurled a crystal vase against the marble wall. His chest heaved with rage and terror as three of Nigeria's most renowned doctors scrambled backward, their white coats splattered with the remnants of their failed treatments. "Mr. Ademi, please, you must calm down or—" "Or what?" Zaire Quote's voice cracked, raw and desperate. "Or I'll die faster. Is that what you were going to say?" He clutched his stomach, doubling over as another wave of agony tore through him. The pain had become his constant companion over the past 6 months, growing more vicious with each passing day. His younger brother Taiwo rushed forward, catching him before he collapsed. "Zaire, please, let them help you." "Help!" Zaire laughed bitterly, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "They can't help. Nobody can." He shoved Taiwo away and staggered toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lagos. The city sprawled below him, a kingdom he had conquered with ruthless ambition. At 32, Zaire Ademi owned half the real estate in Victoria Island, controlled 3 banks, and had politicians in his pocket. His name commanded respect and fear in equal measure. But none of it, not 1 naira of his 7 billion fortune, could save him now. Welcome to TJ's Story, where every tale reveals the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. Subscribe and join our family as we unfold stories that will move your soul. Now, let's continue. The doctors filed out silently, their eyes filled with the same helpless pity Zaire had seen in every specialist's face from Johannesburg to London. He had tried everything. Experimental treatments in Germany, traditional medicine in Ghana, prayers from pastors and imams alike. Nothing worked. The mysterious illness consuming him from the inside had no name, no cure, no mercy. "He's going to die." The whisper came from the doorway. Zaire turned to see his mother, Nadira Ademi, standing rigid in her designer Ankara dress, her face a mask of controlled panic. Behind her, servants huddled in the corridor, their faces drawn with fear. "Don't say that, Mama," Taiwo pleaded. "There has to be something." "There is." The voice was ancient and commanding. It sliced through the tension like a blade through silk. Everyone turned to see an elderly woman emerging from the shadows of the hallway. She wore simple white robes, and her gray locks fell past her waist. Despite her frail appearance, she moved with the authority of a queen. "Who let you in here?" Nadira demanded, but her voice faltered. Even she recognized power when she saw it. "I am Grandmother Falemi," the old woman announced, her eyes fixing on Zaire with unsettling intensity. "And I am here because your son is not sick. He is cursed." The word hung in the air like smoke. Zaire wanted to laugh, to dismiss this as more superstitious nonsense. But something in the woman's gaze pinned him in place. He had spent his life building an empire on logic, strategy, and cold calculation. Yet here he stood, dying despite every rational solution, feeling the truth of her words in his bones. "Cursed," Taiwo whispered. "By who?" "By his own greed." Grandmother Falemi stepped closer to Zaire, studying him like a doctor examining a specimen. 2 years ago, you destroyed a widow's business to expand your empire. You took everything from her, her shop, her savings, her hope. She cursed you with her dying breath, asking the ancestors that you would know what it means to lose everything. Zaire Quote's blood ran cold. He remembered. Mrs. Akaffer, the small grocery store that sat on land he wanted for a luxury hotel. He had offered her money, good money, but she refused to sell. So he had used his connections to condemn the building, freeze her accounts, drive her into bankruptcy. He hadn't known she was sick, hadn't cared to know. "She died 3 months after you ruined her," Grandmother Falemi continued. "And the curse took root. Money cannot break it. Medicine cannot touch it. You have been dying ever since." Nadira stepped forward, her voice sharp. "If you know so much, old woman, then tell us how to break it." Grandmother Falemi Quote's eyes glittered with something between pity and judgment. "There is only one way. Before midnight tonight, Zaire Ademi must marry the poorest woman in this city. Not for show, not for convenience. The marriage must be witnessed by the ancestors, sealed with sacred vows. Only then will the curse lift." Silence crashed through the room like a tsunami. "That's insane," Zaire gasped, another spasm of pain buckling his knees. "Marry a poor woman, why?" "Because Mrs. Ackhafer was poor when you destroyed her. The ancestors demand balance. You must bind yourself to someone who has nothing, show them the respect you denied her, honor them as your equal. Only through this sacrifice can you reclaim what you threw away, your humanity." "No," Zaire shook his head violently. "This is ridiculous. I'm not marrying some random." He never finished the sentence. Pain exploded through his body with such ferocity that he collapsed, convulsing on the marble floor. Blood poured from his nose, his ears. Tewo screamed. Servants rushed forward. Grandmother Falemi stood unmoved. "You have until midnight, Zaire Ademi. 8 hours. Find the poorest woman in Lagos and marry her with a pure heart, or die as Mrs. Ackhafer did, broken and alone." She turned and walked toward the elevator, her white robes flowing behind her like a final judgment. "Wait," Nadira Quote's voice cracked. "How will we know who is poor enough? How will we find her in time?" Grandmother Falemi paused at the elevator doors. "You will know her when you see her. She will have nothing, not even hope." The doors slid shut and she vanished. 4 hours later, as sunset painted Lagos in shades of fire, a convoy of black SUVs prowled through the streets of Makoko, the floating slum that tourists whispered about and locals tried to forget. Tewo sat in the lead vehicle, his driver and 2 bodyguards scanning the crowds of people who lived on stilts above polluted water. "This is madness," Tewo muttered, but the image of his brother convulsing on the floor drove him forward. Zaire was barely conscious now, clinging to life by a thread. The doctors said he had hours, maybe less. They had to find someone, anyone. "There." The driver pointed to a narrow bridge where a figure huddled against the railing. Tewo Quote's door opened, and he stepped out into the thick evening air. The smell hit him first, sewage, rotting fish, desperation. He covered his nose and approached the figure slowly. It was a young woman, maybe 25, wrapped in a filthy wrapper that might have been blue once. Her hair was matted, her face smudged with dirt. She clutched a dented metal bowl with 3 coins inside, her entire wealth. She looked up as Tewo Quote's shadow fell across her, and he saw her eyes. Despite everything, they were beautiful, deep brown and exhausted but still alert, still fighting. "Please, sir," she whispered, lifting the bowl with trembling hands. "Anything, I haven't eaten in 3 days." Tewo Quote's throat tightened. This was her, the poorest woman in Lagos, the one with nothing, not even hope. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Amani," her voice was barely audible. "Amani Bello." "Amani." Tewo crouched down to meet her eyes. "I know this will sound impossible, insane even, but I need you to come with me right now. My brother is dying, and you're the only one who can save him." Amani stared at him, confusion and fear warring in her expression. I don't understand." "You will, but we have to go now, before midnight." He pulled out a thick stack of Naira notes and pressed them into her shaking hands. "This is just the beginning. Please, come with me." Amani looked at the money, then at the strange man in an expensive suit kneeling in the dirt before her. Every instinct screamed danger, but hunger screamed louder, and something in his desperate eyes told her this was her only chance, at food, at survival, at escape from this bridge where she had been slowly dying for months. "Okay," she whispered. Tewo helped her to her feet, and she stumbled, weak from starvation. He caught her, half carrying her to the SUV. As they drove away from Makoko, racing back toward Victoria Island, Amani pressed her face against the cool window and watched the slum disappear behind them. She didn't know where she was going, didn't know what she had agreed to. But as the vehicle pulled up to a gleaming hospital and strong hands helped her out, as she was rushed through corridors that smelled of antiseptic instead of sewage, as they stopped outside a private suite with armed guards at the door, one question burned in her mind. What could a dying man possibly want with someone like her? The door opened. Amani stepped inside the hospital room and froze. On the bed lay a man who looked like he belonged in a magazine, Sharp jawline, expensive silk pajamas, skin that should have glowed with health but instead was gray with approaching death. Machines beeped around him. His mother stood on one side, elegant and cold. His brother stood on the other, desperate and afraid. And in the center of it all, the dying billionaire opened his eyes and looked at her. Really looked at her, this dirty, starving beggar girl in rags. Amani saw something flicker in his gaze, not gratitude, not kindness. Disgust. Pure, undiluted disgust. And in that moment, she understood. She was not here to be saved. She was here to be used, to be a tool in some wealthy man's desperate gamble with death. The old woman in white robes appeared from the corner of the room, holding a ceremonial cloth and speaking in a language Amani didn't understand. The ceremony was beginning. Zaire Ademi was going to marry her. And from the hatred burning in his eyes, Amani knew with crushing certainty, this marriage might save his life. But it was going to destroy hers. If you were Amani, would you have followed that man into the night? Comment below and let us know what you would do. Don't forget to like and subscribe to TJ Story. The clock on the hospital wall read 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until midnight. 13 minutes until Zaire Ademi quote-s death, or his salvation. Grandmother Falami moved around the hospital room with ritualistic precision, drawing symbols on the floor with white chalk, lighting candles that filled the air with the scent of frankincense and myrrh. She chanted in Yoruba, her voice weaving through the beeping machines like an ancient song challenging modern medicine. Amani stood frozen near the door, her legs trembling beneath her. Someone had given her water, and she had drunk it so fast she'd choked. Her stomach cramped from emptiness, her head spun from exhaustion, but none of that compared to the fear coursing through her veins. "Bring her forward," Grandmother Falami commanded. Tewo took Amani quote-s elbow gently, guiding her toward the bed where Zaire lay propped against pillows, his breathing shallow and labored. Up close, she could see the sweat beading on his forehead, the way his hands clenched the sheets as another wave of pain passed through him. He looked at her again, and this time the disgust was mixed with something worse, resentment, as if she were the cause of his suffering rather than his cure. This is who you found," Nadira quote-s voice dripped with venom from across the room. "Look at her. She smells like garbage. She probably has diseases. You expect my son to." "Enough." Grandmother Falami quote-s single word silenced the billionaire's mother. "The ancestors do not judge by appearance, Mrs. Ademi. They judge by truth. And the truth is, your son needs her more than he has ever needed anyone in his privileged life." She turned to Amani, her ancient eyes softening slightly. "Child, do you understand what is happening here?" Amani quote-s voice came out as a whisper. "They said, a marriage to save him." "Yes, a sacred marriage witnessed by powers older than this city, older than this country. Once you speak the vows, you will be bound to him for 1 year. After that, you may choose to leave or stay. Do you accept?" 1 year, Amani quote-s mind raced. 1 year with these people who looked at her like she was trash, but 1 year of shelter, food, safety. She had been dying slowly on that bridge, day by day, meal by missed meal. At least this was a chance. A terrible, frightening chance, but a chance nonetheless. What happens to me after?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "That will be your choice," Grandmother Falami said. "But know this, if you run before the year ends, the curse will return and he will die. Can you promise to stay for 1 full year, no matter what happens?" Amani looked at Zaire. At this man who would rather die than want her here, something in her chest hardened. If he could endure her for survival, she could endure him for the same reason. "Yes," she said, "I promise." "No." The shout came from Zaire himself. He tried to sit up, his face contorted with rage and pain. "I won't do this. I won't marry this beggar. There has to be another way." "There is no other way, Zaire." Tewo quote-s voice broke. "Please, don't be stupid. Don't let pride kill you." "Pride," Zaire laughed bitterly, then coughed blood into his hand. "This isn't about pride. This is about—" Another spasm cut him off. He doubled over, gasping. The clock read 11:52 p.m. 8 minutes, Grandmother Falemi said calmly. Choose life, Zaire Ademi, or choose death, but choose now. The room fell silent except for Zaire Quote's ragged breathing and the steady beep of the heart monitor. Amani watched him struggle with his decision, watched him look at her one more time with those eyes full of loathing, watched the exact moment he realized he had no choice at all. Fine, he spat. Let's get this over with. Grandmother Falemi nodded and gestured for them to stand together. Taiwo helped Zaire out of bed, holding him upright as he swayed dangerously. Amani stepped closer, and the smell of expensive cologne mixed with sickness wafted from him. They were less than a foot apart now. Amani had never been this close to wealth before. Even dying, even broken, Zaire Ademi radiated a kind of power that both frightened and mesmerized her. The old woman placed a white cloth over their joined hands, Zaire's smooth and manicured, Amani's rough and scarred. She began to chant, her voice rising and falling like ocean waves. The candles flickered, though there was no breeze. The air grew thick, charged with something Amani couldn't name. Repeat after me, Grandmother Falemi instructed. I bind myself to you, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, witnessed by the ancestors and sealed by their judgment. Zaire went first, his voice flat and mechanical. I bind myself to you, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, witnessed by the ancestors and sealed by their judgment. Then it was Amani's turn. Her voice trembled but held. I bind myself to you, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, witnessed by the ancestors and sealed by their judgment. The moment the words left her lips, something shifted. The candles flared bright, blindingly bright, and then went out completely. Amani gasped as a sensation like lightning shot through her body, starting from where Zaire's hand touched hers and spreading to every nerve ending. Across from her, Zaire jerked as if electrocuted, his eyes going wide. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The hospital lights flickered back to normal, the machines beeped steadily, and Zaire stood straighter. The grayness faded from his skin like a retreating tide. His breathing evened out. The tension lines around his eyes smoothed. He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers in wonder, and Amani saw the exact moment the pain left his body. It worked, Taiwo breathed. Oh my God, it actually worked. Zaire pulled his hand away from Amani's as if she had burned him. He touched his chest, his stomach, checking himself with trembling hands. I feel nothing. The pain is gone. The curse is lifted, Grandmother Falemi confirmed. But remember, Zaire Ademi, this marriage must last 1 year. If either of you breaks the bond before then, the curse will return tenfold. You will die within hours, and there will be no second chance. No healer in this world or the next can save you. She fixed him with a hard stare. Treat her with respect, honor your vows, or face the consequences. With that, she gathered her things and walked toward the door, leaving behind only the lingering scent of incense and the weight of her warning. The moment she was gone, Zaire turned to Amani, and any gratitude that might have existed evaporated like morning dew. Get her out of my sight, he told Taiwo. Take her to the house. Give her the servants' quarters in the east wing, and someone get her cleaned up. She's disgusting. The words hit Amani like physical blows. She had just saved this man's life. She had bound herself to him for a year, and this was her reward. Zaire, she's your wife now, Taiwo started. She is not my wife. Zaire's voice rose to a shout. She's a convenient solution to a problem, nothing more. I will keep her for the year because I have to, but don't you dare suggest she's anything but a burden I'm forced to carry. He turned his back on all of them and climbed back into the hospital bed, dismissing them with a wave. I want to sleep. Alone. Get her out of here. Nadira smiled, actually smiled, a cruel, satisfied expression. You heard my son. Taiwo, take the girl to the house. I'll join you shortly to make sure she understands her place. The Ademi mansion rose from the Lagos landscape like a fortress of glass and marble, its compound surrounded by walls topped with electric fencing. Palm trees lined the driveway, and fountains sparkled under artfully placed lights. It was beautiful in the way museums were beautiful, impressive but cold, designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Amani sat in the back of the SUV, still wearing her dirty wrapper, still smelling of the slum, and stared at the house that would be her prison for the next year. Taiwo had been kind during the drive, trying to make small talk, apologizing for his brother's behavior. But Amani barely heard him. She was numb, her mind struggling to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. This morning she had been starving on a bridge. Tonight she was married to a billionaire who hated her. The car stopped, and a man in a crisp uniform opened her door. "Madam," he said respectfully, then caught himself, glancing at Taiwo. "Miss." Just Amani," she whispered. Taiwo led her through a side entrance, down a long corridor that seemed to stretch forever. Servants paused in their work to stare at her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to pity to barely concealed disgust. They reached a small door at the far end of the east wing. Taiwo opened it to reveal a tiny room, barely larger than a closet. A narrow bed, a small table, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. No window, no decoration. The kind of room you'd give someone you wanted to forget existed. "I'm sorry," Taiwo said quietly. "This isn't right. You should have one of the guest suites. But Zaire, he's not himself right now. The illness, the curse, it's changed him. Maybe after some time." "It's fine," Amani interrupted. She had slept on concrete. This room had a bed. That alone made it a palace compared to where she'd been. "Thank you for your kindness, sir." "Taiwo, just call me Taiwo." He hesitated at the door. "There are clothes in the dresser, basic things, and someone will bring you food shortly, if you need anything." "I won't." Amani sat on the bed, her back straight despite her exhaustion. "I'll stay out of everyone's way, I promise." Taiwo looked like he wanted to say more, but footsteps echoed in the hallway. He quickly said goodnight and left, closing the door behind him. Amani sat in the silence, in this tiny room at the edge of a mansion, and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. She was married. To a man who despised her. For 1 year. 365 days. A sob built in her throat, but she forced it down. Crying wouldn't change anything. She had made her choice on that bridge. She had said the vows. Now she had to survive the consequences. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called. The door swung open, and Nadira Ademi stood in the threshold, backlit by the hallway lights, her elegant silhouette radiating authority and contempt. "Let's get something straight, girl," Nadira said, her voice soft but deadly. "You are here because of a curse and nothing more. You are not my son's wife. You are not a member of this family. You are a temporary inconvenience that we must tolerate for 12 months. She stepped into the room, and Amani instinctively pressed back against the wall. "You will not speak to my son unless spoken to. You will not eat at our table. You will not wear fine clothes or jewelry. You will not present yourself as anything other than what you are, a charity case we've taken in. Do you understand?" Amani's throat was dry, but she managed to nod. "Good." Nadira's smile was poisonous. "Because if you embarrass this family, if you dare to think you belong here, if you try to claim any rights as Zaire's wife, I will make you wish you had died on that bridge." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. The door closed, and Amani sat alone in her small room, in this massive house, married to a man she had seen for less than an hour total, bound by ancient vows to people who saw her as less than human. The curse had been broken. Zaire Ademi would live. But as Amani curled up on the narrow bed, her stomach growling despite the fear, one terrible truth crystallized in her mind. This marriage had saved his life, but it was going to destroy hers. 3 weeks into the marriage, Amani learned that hunger had many faces. There was the hunger she had known on the streets, the simple physical ache of an empty stomach. That, at least, was honest, direct. You knew what you needed and why you hurt. But the hunger that lived in the Ademi mansion was different. It was the hunger to be seen as human, to be spoken to without contempt, to exist without feeling like an insect someone had forgotten to crush. This hunger was so much worse. You missed a spot. Amani looked up from where she knelt on the marble floor, scrub brush in hand, to find Nadira standing over her. The older woman pointed at an invisible imperfection near the grand staircase. There, do you see it? Amani saw nothing but her own reflection in the polished stone, a girl in a plain gray dress, hair tied back, hands raw from chemicals and work. But she knew better than to argue. Yes, ma'am, I'll fix it. Nadira watched her scrub the same spot 3 more times before walking away without another word. This was Amani's life now. She woke before dawn to prepare breakfast she wasn't allowed to eat. She cleaned rooms she would never sleep in. She washed clothes she would never wear. The servants, the real servants who were paid for their labor, treated her with careful distance, unsure of her status. Was she the master's wife or just another worker? The confusion in their eyes hurt almost as much as the certainty in Nadira's. And Zaire. Zaire acted as though she didn't exist. In 3 weeks, he had spoken directly to her exactly twice. Once to tell her to move out of his way in the hallway. Once to criticize the way she had arranged flowers in the foyer, flowers she hadn't even touched. He would walk past her as if she were furniture. Eat his meals while she served him, never meeting her eyes. Entertain guests in rooms she had just cleaned, laughing and charming, while she stood in corners like a shadow. The worst part was the moments when she caught him staring at her when he thought she wasn't looking. His expression in those unguarded seconds was complicated, disgust mixed with something that might have been guilt or might have been anger at feeling guilty at all. Then he would notice her noticing, and his face would harden into ice. Amani. She set down the scrub brush and hurried toward the kitchen, where the head cook, a stern woman named Patience, gestured frantically at a mountain of dirty dishes. The master is having a dinner party tonight, 15 guests, everything must be perfect. Patience looked her up and down. You'll help serve. Amani's stomach dropped. Serve, but I've never. You'll learn, Bahati will show you. Patience softened slightly. And maybe you'll get to eat the leftovers. You're too thin, girl, even for someone from the streets. The mention of food made Amani's stomach clench with painful hope. She hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon, a small bowl of rice that Tewo had snuck to her room when Nadira wasn't looking. The servants got 3 meals a day, but Amani got whatever scraps people remembered to give her. Thank you, she whispered. Bahati, a young man about her age with kind eyes and a quick smile, found her an hour later and walked her through the basics of formal service. How to hold a tray, how to pour wine, how to be invisible while standing in plain sight. Why are you helping me? Amani asked as they practiced in an empty dining room. Bahati shrugged. Because everyone else in this house has forgotten how to be kind. Don't worry, you'll do fine. Just stay quiet, keep your head down, and don't make eye contact with the guests. That evening, Amani stood against the dining room wall in a borrowed server's uniform, trying to disappear into the expensive wallpaper. Zaire sat at the head of the long table, surrounded by men in tailored suits and women dripping with jewelry. They laughed at his jokes, praised his business acumen, toasted his health. He was different with them, charming, warm, almost likable. Amani watched this version of her husband and felt something bitter coil in her chest. So he was capable of kindness. He simply chose not to waste it on her. More wine, one of the guests called, snapping his fingers in her direction. Amani moved forward with the bottle, her hands shaking slightly. She poured carefully, concentrating on not spilling a single drop. The guests didn't even look at her. None of them did. She was part of the furniture, just like in the hallways. But then, as she poured wine for the woman sitting beside Zaire, the woman suddenly turned to say something to the man on her other side. The movement was quick, unexpected. Amani tried to pull back, but it was too late. Wine splashed across the woman's white designer dress, dark red spreading like blood across expensive fabric. The woman screamed. The entire table fell silent. Amani stood frozen, the bottle still in her hand, watching the red wine drip onto the marble floor. Time seemed to stop. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at the ruined dress and know with absolute certainty that she had just made a terrible mistake. "You stupid girl," the woman leapt to her feet. "Do you know how much this dress cost? Do you have any idea?" "I'm so sorry," Amani whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't." Sorry, the woman's voice rose to a shriek. "Zaire, who is this clumsy idiot? Where did you find her?" All eyes turned to Zaire. Amani looked at him too, desperate, terrified, hopping for what? Mercy, understanding, some acknowledgement that accidents happened. Instead, she watched his jaw tighten, watched his hands curl into fists on the table, watched his eyes go cold and hard as he looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time that night. "She's nobody," he said quietly. "Just a servant, and clearly not a very good one." He stood up, pulled out his wallet, and extracted several crisp bills. He handed them to the wine-stained woman with an apologetic smile. "This should more than cover a replacement. I apologize for the incompetence. I'll make sure she's dealt with appropriately." Dealt with appropriately. The words hung in the air like a noose. The woman accepted the money and sat back down, mollified. The other guests returned to their conversations, the incident already forgotten. Someone made a joke about the difficulty of finding good help these days, and they all laughed. But Zaire didn't sit back down. He walked around the table, each footstep deliberate and measured, until he stood directly in front of Amani. She could smell his cologne, could see the vein throbbing in his temple, could feel the rage radiating off him like heat. "Clean this up," he said, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow more terrifying than if he had shouted. "Then go to your room. Don't come out for the rest of the night. And tomorrow morning, you and I are going to have a conversation about your value to this household." He leaned closer, and she could see herself reflected in his eyes, small, pathetic, worthless. "I saved your life by marrying you," he breathed. "Maybe that was a mistake." Then he turned and walked back to his guests, leaving Amani standing alone in the center of the room, wine bottle trembling in her hands, a puddle of red spreading at her feet like an accusation. Bahati appeared with towels and a bucket, helping her clean in silence. The guests continued their dinner party above them, laughing and eating while Amani scrubbed wine from marble on her hands and knees. When they finally finished, when the last guest had left and the house had fallen quiet, Amani walked back to her tiny room and closed the door. She didn't cry. She was too numb for tears. But as she sat on her narrow bed in the darkness, she understood something fundamental had shifted. The hunger she had known on the streets had been about survival. This hunger, the hunger in her chest, in her soul, was about something worse. It was about endurance. About lasting 337 more days in a house that treated her like a mistake someone had made and couldn't quite figure out how to correct. She thought about Zaire's words at the dinner table. "She's nobody." And for the first time since that midnight wedding, Amani wondered if he was right. Maybe she was nobody. Maybe she had always been nobody. Maybe that's why it was so easy for him to look through her like she didn't exist. Outside her door, she heard footsteps, then Zaire's voice, sharp with anger. "I don't care what that old woman said. 1 year, just 1 year. Then she's gone and I never have to think about this nightmare again." Nadira's response was too quiet to hear, but her son's next words carried clearly. "I hate her, Mother. I hate that I need her. I hate that I'm bound to her. I hate that every time I look at her, I'm reminded of how powerless I was." A pause. "Sometimes I wish the curse had just killed me. At least then I wouldn't have to live with this shame." The footsteps faded. Silence returned. And in her tiny room, Amani finally understood the full truth of her situation. Zaire didn't just resent her. He hated her. Not for who she was, but for what she represented. His own mortality, his own helplessness, his own very human need for something he couldn't buy. And that hatred was going to poison every single day of the next 337. But here was the thing Zaire didn't know yet. Here was the thing Amani was only beginning to discover about herself. She had survived the streets. She had survived starvation. She had survived being nothing and nobody for so long that disappearing into walls came naturally. And if that was what it took to last 1 year in this beautiful, terrible house, then she would survive this too. Even if it killed something inside her in the process. Do you think endurance is strength or silent suffering? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you're invested in Amani's journey, hit that like button and subscribe to TJ's story. 2 months had passed since the midnight wedding, and Amani had learned to make herself smaller. She moved through the mansion like a ghost, silent and unseen. She had memorized Zaire's schedule so she could avoid him. She knew which hallways Nadira favored and took different routes. She ate her meager meals in the kitchen after everyone else had finished, grateful for whatever Bahati managed to save for her. She had become very good at disappearing. So when Tewo knocked on her door one morning with an urgent expression, Amani knew immediately that her careful invisibility was about to shatter. "Amani, I need you to come with me," he said, his voice tight with stress. "Right now." She followed him through the mansion to Zaire's home office, a room she had never been allowed to enter. Inside, Zaire sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his jaw clenched, his eyes stormy. Across from him sat an elderly man in an expensive suit, reading from a thick document. "Ah, there she is," the old man said, looking up with sharp, calculating eyes. "Mrs. Ademi." The title felt like a slap. No one had called her that since the wedding night. "Amani, this is Mr. Okonkwo," Tewo explained. "He's the executor of our late uncle's estate." "Your uncle, Chief Ademi, was a very wealthy man," Mr. Okonkwo continued. "He left specific instructions regarding his inheritance. The bulk of his estate, including several properties, business shares, and liquid assets worth approximately 2 billion naira, is to go to his eldest nephew, Zaire." Amani didn't understand why she needed to be here for this. "However," Mr. Okonkwo's voice sharpened, "there is one condition. Chief Ademi believed strongly in family values and the sanctity of marriage. Therefore, Zaire can only inherit if he is married and living with his wife as a proper couple." The words hung in the air like a grenade. Zaire's knuckles went white on the armrests of his chair. "That's ridiculous. I am married." "Yes, I've heard about your arrangement," Mr. Okonkwo interrupted smoothly. "Which is why I'm here to verify the authenticity of your marriage. Chief Ademi anticipated attempts to circumvent his wishes, so I will be conducting a thorough investigation." He pulled out a folder and opened it on the desk. "I will need to see evidence that you and your wife live as a married couple, photographs together, shared living spaces, social media presence. I will interview your staff, and I will be observing you both over the next week." Amani watched the color drain from Zaire's face. "1 week," he repeated. "Yes, after which I will make my determination. If I find that your marriage is a sham, the inheritance will go to your cousin Femi instead." Mr. Okonkwo stood, gathering his papers. "I'll return tomorrow morning to begin my assessment. I suggest you prepare accordingly." The moment the lawyer left, Zaire exploded. "This is impossible. That old fool, my uncle, he's trying to control me from the grave." He turned his fury on Amani as if this were somehow her fault. 2 billion naira. I can't lose 2 billion naira because of some ridiculous moral clause. "What do we do?" Tewo asked quietly. Zaire's eyes locked onto Amani, and she saw his brilliant, ruthless mind calculating possibilities. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold and determined. "We convince him the marriage is real." Amani's heart began to pound. "For 1 week, you're going to be my wife," Zaire continued, standing and walking toward her. "Not a servant, not a burden, my actual wife. You'll move into my bedroom. We'll take photographs together. You'll dress appropriately, act appropriately, and do whatever it takes to sell this illusion." "Zaire, maybe we should," Tewo started. 2 billion naira, Zaire's voice cut like a blade. "I am not losing my inheritance because I can't pretend to tolerate her for 7 days." He looked at Amani with something between desperation and contempt. "Can you do that? Can you act like you belong here?" Amani found her voice, small but steady. What happens after he approves the inheritance? Then everything goes back to normal. You return to your room, I get my money, and we forget this ever happened. Normal, as if the last 2 months of being treated like garbage was normal, as if disappearing into walls was what she deserved. But what choice did she have? Okay, she whispered, I'll do it. The transformation began immediately. Nadira protested violently, but Zaire overruled her for the first time in his life. It's 2 billion naira, mother. You can tolerate her for a week. They moved Amani's few belongings into Zaire's master suite, a room larger than any building she'd ever lived in. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Lagos skyline. A bed the size of her old room sat in the center, covered in Egyptian cotton sheets. A bathroom with marble everything and a bathtub that could fit 3 people. You'll sleep on the couch, Zaire informed her curtly. Don't touch anything you don't have to. Then came the styling team. 3 women descended on Amani like a benevolent hurricane. They washed her hair with products that smelled like flowers and honey. They scrubbed her skin until it glowed. They painted her nails, shaped her eyebrows, and applied makeup with the precision of artists. When they finally let her look in the mirror, Amani didn't recognize herself. The girl staring back had smooth, hydrated skin instead of dry, cracked patches. Her hair fell in soft, dark waves instead of matted tangles. Her lips were full and defined, her eyes bright and lined with kohl. She looked beautiful. Now the clothes, one of the stylists said, pulling out a flowing emerald dress that probably cost more than Amani had earned in her entire life on the streets. The fabric felt like water against her skin. The dress hugged her curves she hadn't even known she had beneath her baggy servant clothes. Heels added 3 inches to her height. Delicate gold jewelry caught the light at her ears and throat. When she walked back into the bedroom, Zaire was working on his laptop. He glanced up, did a double take, and then stared. For 3 full seconds, he just stared. Amani stood frozen under his gaze, unsure what to do with her hands, with her face, with the strange vulnerability of being seen, truly seen, for the first time since the wedding. Something flickered in Zaire's eyes, surprise, maybe even appreciation, but then his expression shuttered closed like a door slamming. That'll work, he said flatly, returning to his laptop. The photographer is coming in an hour. Try not to look miserable in the pictures. The photo shoot was torture. Closer, the photographer instructed. Act like you're in love. Come on, this is supposed to be natural. They were in the mansion's garden, the afternoon sun painting everything golden. Zaire stood stiffly beside Amani, his hand barely touching her waist, his smile forced and brittle. Mr. Ademi, you look like you're at a funeral. Relax. Touch her like you mean it. Zaire's jaw tightened, but he pulled Amani closer. She could feel the heat of his body through the thin fabric of her dress, could smell his cologne, could hear his breathing. Better. Now, Mrs. Ademi, look at your husband, like he's the only person in the world. Amani turned her face up to Zaire's and found herself actually looking at him for the first time in months. Not glancing, not stealing glimpses, really looking. He had a small scar above his left eyebrow. His eyes were brown with gold flecks that caught the sunlight. A muscle in his jaw twitched when he was frustrated, like right now. Beautiful, the photographer called. Hold that, perfect. The camera clicked rapidly. Now let's get one on the couch inside, something more intimate. They moved to the living room, where Zaire sat on a cream-colored sofa, and Amani was instructed to sit beside him, tucked against his side. Wrap your arm around her, the photographer directed, and Mrs. Ademi, rest your head on his shoulder, like you're comfortable there. Zaire's arm came around her shoulders, tentative at first, then more firmly. Amani leaned into him, and despite everything, all the cruelty, all the hatred, his body felt warm, solid, safe. It was a lie, of course, but for just a moment, she let herself feel it anyway. Look at each other, the photographer said softly, like you're sharing a secret. They turned at the same time, faces inches apart. This close, Amani could see the flecks of gold in Zaire's eyes, could count his eyelashes, could feel his breath on her lips. The camera clicked, but neither of them moved. Something passed between them in that moment. Not love, not even liking, but recognition, like seeing a stranger across a crowded room and realizing you've met them before in a dream. Zaire's eyes dropped to her lips for half a second, then back up, confused by his own reaction. "Perfect," the photographer's voice broke the spell. "That's the shot, you two are naturals." Zaire pulled away immediately, standing up and putting distance between them. "Are we done?" "Just a few more, one in the bedroom." The bedroom shoot was worse. They sat on the edge of Zaire's massive bed, the photographer arranging them like dolls. Amani in Zaire's lap, Zaire's hand in her hair, their foreheads touching, each pose more intimate than the last. "This is the money shot," the photographer said. "Lie back together like you just woke up, natural in love." They lay on the bed, facing each other on the pillows. Zaire's arm draped over her waist, her hand resting on his chest, close enough that she could feel his heartbeat, surprisingly fast. "Closer," the photographer insisted. Zaire shifted, and suddenly there was no space between them at all. Their bodies touched from chest to knee. His face hovered above hers, his weight supported on one elbow. "Look at her like she's the most precious thing in the world," the photographer said softly. For a moment, just a fleeting, impossible moment, Zaire did. His eyes softened. His hand on her waist tightened slightly, as if anchoring himself. And Amani saw something in his expression that looked almost like wonder, as if he'd just discovered something unexpected and wasn't sure what to do with it. The camera clicked. "Perfect, that's it, we're done." Zaire rolled away immediately, leaving the bed like it had burned him. He practically fled to the bathroom, closing the door behind him with more force than necessary. Amani lay on the bed alone, her heart racing, her skin tingling where his body had pressed against hers, and tried to understand what had just happened. It was just for the photos, she told herself, just pretend. But the way he had looked at her in that last shot, that hadn't felt like pretending. That night, Amani lay on the couch in Zaire's room, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the ceiling. Across the room, Zaire lay in his massive bed, equally awake. Neither of them spoke. But in the darkness, both of them kept seeing the same thing. The moment on the bed when the camera disappeared and something real, something terrifying, flickered between them. Outside, the Lagos night hummed with life. Inside, two people bound by a curse and separated by pride lay awake in the same room, wondering what it meant that pretending to love someone could feel, for just a heartbeat, like the most honest thing they'd ever done. And neither of them was ready to admit that the most dangerous lie wasn't the one they were telling the lawyer. It was the one they were telling themselves. The week of pretending passed in a strange blur. Mr. Okonkwo watched them like a hawk, breakfast together, lunch together, dinner together, Zaire playing the devoted husband, calling her my love with practiced ease, Amani smiling on cue, laughing at his jokes, touching his arm at appropriate moments. They were good at it, too good. The staff noticed. Amani caught them whispering, saw the confused looks when Zaire held doors open for her, when he pulled out her chair, when he spoke to her with something resembling respect. Bahati cornered her in the kitchen on day 5. "What's happening? Why is he being nice to you?" "It's not real," Amani whispered. "His uncle's inheritance. We have to convince the lawyer we're actually married." "Oh," Bahati Quota's face fell. "So it's just pretend, yes." But even as she said it, Amani wasn't entirely sure anymore. Because Zaire was changing. Small things. He'd started asking if she was comfortable before they posed for photos. He'd made sure she had enough to eat at meals. He'd even smiled at her once. A real smile, not the fake one for the camera, when she'd made a joke about the absurdity of their situation. And the touching, God, the touching. For the lawyer's benefit, they held hands, sat close. Zaire Quota's arm around her shoulders became routine, his hand on her back when they walked. Each touch lingered a little longer than necessary. Each glance held a little more weight. On day 6, Mr. Okonkwo seemed satisfied. I must say, you two seem genuinely happy together. I'll have my final report ready tomorrow. That night, Zaire actually spoke to her like a person. You did well this week, he said as they prepared for bed, her on the couch, him in the bedroom. The inheritance should be approved. Good, then things can go back to normal. Normal, that word again, but now it felt wrong in her mouth. Yes, Zaire agreed, but he didn't sound convinced. Back to normal. He paused at the bedroom doorway, looking at her in the lamplight. Amani, But whatever he was going to say died on his lips. He shook his head and disappeared into the bedroom, closing the door firmly behind him. Amani lay on the couch that night, missing the warmth of his presence in ways that terrified her. Day 7, the final day. Amani woke to chaos. Shouting echoed through the house. She stumbled from the couch, disoriented, and found Zaire in the hallway arguing with Nadira. She collapsed, Zaire. In the kitchen, she's been starving herself to death while you played house with her. What, who collapsed? Your wife, Nadira spat the word like poison. Or have you forgotten what she really is beneath all those pretty clothes? Zaire's face went white. He pushed past his mother and ran. Amani followed, her heart pounding, and found a crowd of servants in the kitchen. On the floor, Bahati cradled someone. It took Amani a moment to realize they were talking about her. No, not her. Another servant. A young girl who'd been kind to her who'd. She hasn't eaten properly in weeks, one of the other servants was saying. She kept giving her food away. To, the servant's eyes found Amani. To Mrs. Ademi. The room fell silent. Amani's stomach dropped. It was true. The girl had been sneaking her food, claiming she'd already eaten, insisting Amani needed it more. And Amani, desperate and hungry, had taken it. She'd taken food from someone who had even less than she did. Get Dr. Adwale here immediately, Zaire ordered, his voice sharp. He knelt beside the girl, checking her pulse, barking orders about glucose and water. This was a different Zaire, focused, commanding, actually caring about someone's well-being. Where had this person been for the last 2 months? Tewo appeared with the family doctor, who examined the unconscious girl and shook his head. Severe malnutrition, dehydration. She needs hospital care immediately. Then take her, use my account, whatever she needs. Zaire stood, his jaw tight. And I want a full review of how we're treating our staff. This is unacceptable. His eyes found Amani across the room, and something in his expression made her chest ache. Not anger, something worse. Disappointment in himself. Hours later, after the girl had been taken to the hospital, after Mr. Okonkwo had delivered his approval and left, after the pretense had ended and the inheritance was secured, Zaire found Amani back in the master bedroom, packing her few things to return to her small room. Don't, he said from the doorway. She froze. Don't what? Don't go back to that room. Amani turned to face him, confused. But the week is over. The lawyer approved. I know, but... He stepped into the room, and for the first time since their wedding, he looked uncertain, vulnerable. That girl collapsed because of how we run this household, because of how I've been treating you. It's not your... It is my fault. His voice cracked. You're my wife, Amani, not by choice but by sacred vow, and I've treated you worse than I've treated strangers, worse than I've treated enemies. He moved closer, and she could see the guilt etched into every line of his face. This week, pretending to care about you, it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be, and that scares me, because I don't know what that means. Amani's throat tightened. What are you saying? I'm saying... Zaire took a breath. I'm saying don't go back to that room. Stay here, in the guest suite next door if you want space. But not in that closet, not anymore. You deserve better than that. Why? The word came out as a whisper. Why now? Because that girl almost died, and it made me realize. He stopped, struggling with words. Made me realize that I've been so angry at the curse, at the situation, that I forgot you're a person who saved my life, a person who's endured months of cruelty without complaint. He looked at her with those brown and gold eyes that had haunted her dreams all week. I can't promise I'll be perfect. I can't promise I'll suddenly be a good husband, but I can promise to try, to see you, to treat you with the basic dignity you should have had from the beginning. Amani wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. But she'd learned not to trust kindness from this man. It always had a price. And when the year ends, she asked quietly, when I'm no longer necessary, what then? Zaire flinched like she'd struck him, because they both knew the answer. When the year ended, she'd be gone, and he'd forget her like a bad dream. I don't know, he admitted, but can we just try, for the next months, to make this bearable for both of us? Amani looked at this man who had destroyed her, who was now offering her scraps of humanity like they were treasures, and she realized something that broke her heart. She wanted to say yes. Despite everything, despite the abuse, the humiliation, the cruelty. She wanted to say yes because this week of pretending had shown her something dangerous, a glimpse of who Zaire could be when he wasn't imprisoned by his own pride and anger. And that glimpse had been beautiful. Okay, she whispered, we'll try. The relief on his face was unmistakable. Thank you. He left her then, closing the door gently. And Amani sat on the edge of the massive bed, surrounded by luxury she still didn't feel entitled to, and wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. Because hopping for change from someone who had broken you, that was the most dangerous thing of all. Can someone who caused deep pain ever truly change? Or are we just setting ourselves up for more heartbreak? Drop your thoughts below and subscribe to TJ's story. 4 months later, everything had changed. Amani now lived in the guest suite beside Zaire's room, a beautiful space with windows, sunlight, and dignity. She ate at the family table, wore clothes that fit, walked through the mansion with her head held high. And Zaire was different. He asked about her day, brought her books he thought she'd like, taught her to read financial reports because, as he said, you should understand the family business. They had coffee together in the mornings, talked about everything and nothing. Sometimes she caught him staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Nadira had retreated, furious but powerless. Tewo smiled more. Even the servants treated Amani with respect now that Zaire had made it clear she mattered. It should have been perfect. But Amani couldn't forget. Every kindness reminded her of the cruelty that came before. Every gentle touch echoed with memories of contempt. And the calendar on her phone counted down, 97 days until the year ended, 97 days until she could leave. The question was, did she still want to? The explosion came on a Tuesday. Amani walked into the living room to find Nadira showing Zaire her phone, her face triumphant. Look what I found. Screenshots from a street vendor near Makoko. Your wife has been stealing from us, sending money to her old beggar friends using your accounts. That's not true, Amani said quietly. Then explain these transfers. Nadira thrust the phone at Zaire. 50,000 naira, 100,000, all to suspicious accounts. Zaire looked at the screen, then at Amani, his expression unreadable. Is this real? For a moment, Amani saw doubt flicker in his eyes, the old suspicion, the old contempt, and she realized he still didn't fully trust her. After 4 months of change, part of him still saw her as the beggar who'd trapped him. Something inside her hardened. No, Zaire, it's not real. Your mother doctored those screenshots because she can't stand that you're finally treating me like a human being. Amani's voice was steady, cold. But the fact that you had to ask, that you believed it even for a second, tells me everything I need to know. Amani, I didn't. You did. She looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something break. You've been kind these past months, gentle, almost like the man in those photographs, but you never fully trusted me, never fully saw me as an equal, just a reformed charity case you were trying to tolerate. That's not fair. Isn't it? Amani's eyes burned. The year is almost over, Zaire, 97 days, and I'm done waiting to see if you'll ever truly change. She walked to the door, then paused. I'll stay until the year ends, because I gave my word, but the moment that clock strikes midnight on our anniversary, I'm gone. The next 3 months were agony. Zaire tried everything: apologies, gifts, explanations. He'd fired investigators who proved Nadira had fabricated the evidence. He'd confronted his mother publicly, finally choosing Amani over family loyalty. But Amani had stopped hopping. She was polite, distant, present but absent. She'd learned to protect herself by not feeling anything at all. Until the final night. Midnight approached. Their year of marriage was ending. Amani stood in her suite, bag packed, watching the clock. 11:59. A knock. Zaire stood in the doorway, his eyes red, his voice broken. Don't go, please. Give me one reason to stay. Because I love you. The words hung in the air like a prayer, like a confession, like a grenade. I love you, Amani, not the curse, not the obligation. You. I fell in love with your strength, your grace, your refusal to let this house break you. I fell in love with the way you drink your coffee and how you laugh at Tewo's terrible jokes and the fact that you're still kind despite everything I put you through. Tears streamed down his face. I was a monster to you, I know that, and I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm begging you, don't leave. Not because of the curse, not because you're trapped, but because you choose to stay. Because somewhere in these 12 months, maybe you felt something too. Midnight struck. 12 chimes echoed through the house. The curse was broken, completely, finally. Amani was free. She could walk out that door and never look back. Start over. Find someone who'd loved her from the beginning. Forget this year of pain and impossible transformation. Her hand touched the doorknob. Zaire closed his eyes, accepting defeat. And Amani realized something. Freedom wasn't about leaving. It was about choosing. And for the first time in her life, she had the power to choose her own fate. She let go of the doorknob. I'm not staying because I'm trapped, she said quietly. I'm not staying because of magic or vows or obligation. She turned to face him and let him see everything in her eyes. The pain, the hope, the terrifying vulnerability of truth. I'm staying because somewhere in all that pretending, it became real for me too. And I want to see what we could be if we started over. Not as a billionaire and a beggar, not as captor and captive, but as two broken people trying to build something beautiful from the wreckage. Zaire's breath caught. You mean it? On one condition. Amani stepped closer. We start completely over. New vows, new promises, not because we have to, because we want to. Yes, he reached for her hands, and this time his touch was reverence. Anything, everything. I'll spend the rest of my life proving I've changed, that you didn't make a mistake. I know, Amani whispered. Because this time I'm not the one taking a risk. You are. You're risking your heart on someone who has every reason to destroy it, and that's how I know it's real. She kissed him then, their first real kiss, not for cameras or lawyers or curses, but because they chose each other despite everything. Outside, Lagos sparkled with midnight lights. Inside, two people who'd been bound by magic discovered something stronger, the choice to love anyway. The curse had saved Zaire's life. But Amani's choice. That's what set them both free. What would you have done? Forgiven and stayed, or walked away forever? Let us know in the comments. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to TJ's Story for more incredible tales that will touch your soul. Thank you for taking this journey with us. Until next time, remember, the greatest freedom is the power to choose your own story.